I am Gareth Hughes. I'm here from the Career Development Service, and I'm going to spend around about 10 minutes talking you through using Blackboard badges and e-portfolios and how we've been using the Leicester Award over the past academic year. So to give you an overview of what I'm going to go through, first of all I'm going to say why we opted to use e-portfolios and badges and how we've been implementing them, some of the advantages we found from using this particular tool, some of the limitations that we found of the technology, challenges that we encountered in trying to implement it, and some of the next steps I want to take over the next academic year based on my findings I've had so far. So to give you a bit of context, there's actually two separate online courses that we've been using e-portfolios in this year. The first one is Online Networking and Employability, which is an extracurricular activity that can go on a student's HERE, or Higher Education Achievement Report, which they can just opt into, and it's open to distance learners, and they participate in that over the course of the year. By doing that, that makes them eligible to take part in the Leicester Award, which is another online course that they take part in over the academic year. Both of those have been using e-portfolios, and I will be referring to both of those separately as I go through. When I'm referring to badges, I was only using those in online networking and employability. This is really a small-scale test for that one. Okay, so e-portfolios. Has anyone used that feature at all so far? Have you even explored it? No. Don't look back. Okay. They're very, very similar to physical portfolios, just in a digital sense, that they're just a collection of electronic evidence, which is assembled over time to showcase learning and development in a far larger, more holistic way than just a final written assignment. And we opted to use them primarily because they are formative, which works better for our skill and personal development courses than a final written assessment. They build them over the course of the entire academic year, which is, well, not the entire academic year, of the three to 6 months that these particular courses take, and they really showcase all the development the students have been undergoing. They can also include a massive variety of evidence in there. So when I say it's a collection of online evidence, I mean that it is any file type they want to upload, so whether that's audio or video or pictures or written documents or Excel spreadsheets or anything that they feel documents and showcases their development, they can upload into this, and it can be used as part of the assessment process. And also it's downloadable at the end as a zip file, so the students can then take it with them if they want to continue using that particular document or just refer back to it at any point later on. In terms of badges, these are digital achievements earned by participation in a virtual learning environment collected to prove students' learning. And does anyone have a PlayStation or an Xbox? A few people around the room. They work in basically the same way as trophies and achievements in games. They're just triggered by certain actions that you'd either carry out in-game or in this case in the course, which would say, well done, you've either reached level 25 in multiplayer, or in my case, the equally exciting, you have written your social media schedule and things like that. So we opted to use those because they encourage wider learning outside of the primarily assessed aspects of the course. So I'm sure, as you all know, students kind of get into the habit of learning toward the assessment they're going to face, and they'll work on those specific bits of the course and then just pick up that. These are designed to make them look at the whole course and explore bits they'd otherwise skip by learning specifically for that particular assessment, because you can say, okay, there's this bit of knowledge that's quite useful to them, but it's not going to crop up in the exam or the essay, but by making a badge or an achievement triggered by them accessing that part of the virtual learning environment, they're more likely to go in there and have a look around. At least that's what the research says, and we found a bit of that as part of this course. They're also tied into the Mozilla Backpack, which is a feature which acts as part of Firefox, and students can take all of these achievements in their larger Mozilla Backpack alongside with any other achievements triggered elsewhere on the internet through any other courses using this feature and take it with them. That's not as important right now because it's not used as widely as it possibly could be at the moment, but I think it's gaining traction. It's going to be a more important feature as it goes on. And then also, personally, I just saw it as the opportunity for a pilot in a relatively small, safe environment, because I really wanted to play with this tool and see what it could do. So I just seized the opportunity. So some of the advantages we found with e-portfolios, as I mentioned, the variety of evidence was really, really useful and really, really important, because the students doing the Leicester Award might be doing online networking and employability, or they might be doing part-time work or volunteering or mentoring or any other extracurricular activity that would make them eligible for the Leicester Award. And the evidence that showcases their learning as part of that is wide and varied. And by using these e-portfolios, they can incorporate all of that into one place, regardless of how it's formatted. It's also really good at being developmental and gives a clear overview of the skills and knowledge gained over the period of time. Because if they're building it over the course, then you've got entries from day 1, day 30, and day 60, and day 90. And you can compare their learning at each of those points. which gives rise to a better opportunity for a bit of ipsative assessment and seeing how each student is personally developing, rather than just going towards this random mark at the end of it, which would measure attainment of specific learning outcomes. It's also very, very useful in assessment because it works very well with Blackboard's inbuilt assessment tool. So if it's turned in as an assignment at the end, whoever's marking it can go in there and explore it from within that assessment screen, and they don't have to flick around between multiple documents when assessing it. So it's quite smooth in that regard. In terms of badges, the main advantages that we found were they were encouraging collection and exploration of the course, and people were engaging in all of the different activities that were in the virtual learning environment that weren't necessarily going to form part of their final assessment piece at the end. So they did prove very, very useful in that. They also give a nice overview of the student progress and retention on the course. Retention probably isn't as much of an issue in academic departments, but with an extracurricular activity we need to know how many people we've still got doing it at each point, and this was a very, very useful way of having an oversight of that, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Also, the badges were customizable, so if you want to brand them and have them look like a particular thing with the university logo or with an image representing the particular course, then you can do that. You can use whatever imagery you want for those badges. So when I'm referring to the imagery, I mean those small logos on the left-hand side. You can make them whatever you want. Now this is what it looks like in terms of having an overview of how many students have done each bit. So you can see, I don't know if you can squint and make it out, but we've got 81 recipients of this particular badge and 59 of this one. So we can target which ones students are and aren't engaging in. We can also see which students have and haven't engaged in each of those particular badges and see which bits people are skipping the most. This is what the achievements or the badges look like from a student's point of view. This is what they see when they've got them so far. So each time they participate in a particular activity in the course, they unlock one of these and it pops up in the central Blackboard area for them. Usefully, it also shows them which ones they haven't got yet, so they can see which bits they have skipped or have still got upcoming, and give them an idea of where the course is going, or which other bits they should really be having a look at. Now, in terms of limitations, there were quite a few, because it's very, very new that we were working with. One main limitation that I personally faced was unfamiliarity with both of these particular aspects, which I'm sure anyone else who starts using them will also face, because I had no experience of how this was going to work, and so it could be quite time consuming putting all this stuff together. In terms of the e-portfolios, with online networking and employability, they were being peer assessed at the end of it, and e-portfolios did not work very smoothly with the peer assessment feature built in Blackboard. We couldn't really use it through PeerMark or anything like that. They just didn't quite match up. So there was a bit of a workaround that we had to do when they shared their e-portfolio with me, and then I saw who I had, and then paired them up and said, share yours with this person, and it was quite time consuming that way. So peer assessment doesn't really work very well, but typical assessment does. So if you're having it assessed by one of your markers, that's fine. Also, it's not really suitable for group work because you can only have one author for an e-portfolio at any one time because it's locked to that student's profile. You can't have multiple students pouring into one e-portfolio as part of a project. So wikis and things on Blackboard work far better for that particular type of work. Now with badges, other limitations for those, as I said, unfamiliarity with the software, so having to play around, it was quite difficult to figure out what did what in the system at first. And also, the main limitation I faced with badges were the triggers being very, very primitive. Now, when I said that they're activated by doing a particular thing in the course, that's what you'd set to make it happen. So it'll be based on a certain date passing, or you can make it triggered for people you then put in a particular group on Blackboard, or maybe they have to click review on an item on Blackboard, or mainly you can tie them to assessment. So if they turn in their assignment or get a mark back on a certain assignment, then you can trigger all those badges, which works okay, but it didn't really work for me because I wanted them to be the first time they post on any particular forum, if they click through to a link I might have put on there, if they watch a video I might have on one of the items and things like that, and you couldn't really tie the triggers to everything I wanted to in the course. So the vast majority of mine ended up being stuck on students click review after reading through the item, which was completely, or very, very fallible, because you're relying on the students to then click review to actually keep a track of who's getting which achievement. So in terms of challenges I was facing with e-portfolios, because they're new for us, they were new for the students as well, so student understanding was quite a big challenge, and we had an onslaught of emails of students not really understanding how to build their e-portfolio, how to add things to it, how to move things around, how to upload documents and things like that. And we spent a large portion of time creating lots of resources videos and guides and things so they can actually learn how to do that properly. In terms of IT compatibility, it was mostly okay, but there were some browser issues with ePortfolios. Students finding that they couldn't actually upload or update their ePortfolio on certain browsers. It seemed to work fine on Firefox most of the time, but even that wasn't uniform for some reason, so there were some issues along those lines. Something else that we faced with ePortfolios that we didn't really think of at the start was inconsistent formatting on the part of the students. So the ePortfolios we were getting at the end looked random, really. There was no consistent format. They didn't really look very similar and could, as a result, be quite difficult to mark. So that was something that we definitely sort out for next year. And also, it was quite time-consuming putting this together because, as I mentioned, it was the first time. So it took a lot of time to learn how to do this properly. In terms of badges, the main challenge was that triggering inconsistency, but mainly that was because students weren't clicking review, so my number of how many people had done a particular thing were slightly skewed. So if I could figure out how to work the triggers a little bit better, then it might make that run a little more smoothly. And really they were a new concept for the students, so they weren't quite understanding exactly what these things were without quite a bit of explanation being available on the Blackboard site for them to read through. So that's something to take into account. That will gradually get easier the more and more they're used. But my course was targeted at mature distance learners for the most part, and this was a completely new thing for them to deal with, so they really didn't quite understand what a lot of the badges were getting at. So to try and help with those types of things, we created these case studies, which is something I strongly recommend doing if you do opt to use ePortfolios. We created these case studies which build with the students along the course. So there's these 3 fictitious students, and as the course goes on, their ePortfolios as examples build up so the students have got a point of reference to see what theirs should look like and what type of things they should be including. So we've got this one who matches pretty much the description of the vast majority of students who are doing my course, mature distance learners. And then we've got this one who's more of an undergraduate student, just to give the variety of students we had a nice point of reference on what they should be putting in. This is what that example looked like if you click through. So they can be quite plain, but obviously you can upload pictures and all sorts of things to there. And they're quite nice. So the next steps that I'll be looking at will be really exploring these tools more thoroughly, because I think there's a lot of potential in there for how they could be used. I just need more time and more experience playing around with them to really get the most out of the way these features could actually work. In terms of ePortfolios, the first thing I do next year is create consistent formatting rules and say yours must look like this, because that just makes everyone's lives easier, particularly the marker at the end of it. There's less detective work trying to find out whether a student's included particular elements, because they're not scattered all over the place. I'd also look at improving the peer marking process. How I do that at the moment I don't know, but I'm going to be looking at that over the summer. At the moment I just don't really want to do the same workaround I had because it was quite long-winded. In terms of badges, the next step I might look at is certificates, which is another flip side of the badging module. Students can trigger badges by doing particular things in the course, but they can also trigger certificates by doing all of those badges and things within a course, which means at the end of the course they can automatically trigger the certificate that they would get from the Leicester Award, which would be delivered to them as a digital file that they can then just download, which would be quite nice because that will solve our certificate distribution to the distance learners, which is a big issue that we face at the moment. In terms of badges, I also want to look at incorporation of more game mechanics. So for those familiar with gamification, that's something I want to keep looking at, because this is really just the tip of the iceberg of what is possible to do with a course to improve student engagement with it. And I want to do some more testing of the triggers to see whether I can stack the logic that we've got on there to make them more specific for what it is that I actually want to do, and whether I can play around and make them tied a little bit more closely to some of the elements of the course. So in terms of gamification, this is one of the elements I did put in this year that I want to expand on. As the student goes through, I couldn't come up with a progress bar that did actually update every time they got the achievements, but as they were gaining achievements, I kind of put in this to say how far they'd come through the course, to give them an idea of how close they were to completion. So that's the type of thing I want to implement next year. Now, I've got an example one I can show people if they're interested. Aside from that, I'll move on to questions if anyone's got any.
I wonder what's your level. I wonder if it's worth showing your course and how badges are actually triggered within the Blackboard course as the students go through the content.
Yeah, I can do that if you want.
worth showing the people how you set that up, because you say about the particular review. So can you explain how you have to set that whole process up in terms of having to put the review marker in place, etc., for the badges to be enabled?
Yeah, happy to. So I'll go into it with edit mode off so you can see it kind of roughly as the students would, but it's separated into multiple workshops on here, multiple e-workshops. And as they work through each of these things, at the end of some of them, that's not one of the ones with a review on it, but this is one of the triggers I set up, so they have to mark reviewed at the end of that, because the trigger doesn't necessarily work very easily for me to just set it to trigger once they've completed this task. It's just not advanced enough to be able to do that, so they have to click mark reviewed. They can see all of their achievements through here, so you can set it up as a tool on the left hand side, and as I can say, they can see all the achievements they've got, which ones they've earned, which ones they haven't earned, and so on there. And you want to see how to actually set them up. It's just in course tools under achievements, and it does take a little minute to load, so you'll have to bear with me.
What's the difference between a tick and a trophy?
That was just the pictures I chose for those particular achievements. So when they completed a workshop, I decided it was a tick, and if they completed a particular aspect within a workshop, I decided it was a trophy. You can pick multiple, well, you can pick from a number of different pictures, but also, as I said, you can upload any picture you want to use in that particular bit.
Can you upload a picture of a certificate with just a badge? I can't remember.
I think you can upload the full picture. That's, as I said, that's the one I want to play with next year. So
certificate, I think, is more like a PDF template, so you can personalise the template. So Gareth suggested earlier, certificates are triggered by accumulation of a number of badges. So what you do is create a PDF template of the certificate. So in Gareth's case, you can create University of Leicester logo in the top corner, Leicester award and title of it, and then it just personalises the information within that template.
So this is kind of my full achievements area that I've got on Blackboard, and like I said, I can see which recipients they've been of this achievement that I created. So I can see which students have done it so far. Annoyingly, you can't extract that list very easily, so it is a bit of an arduous process to go through and see who's done what. But it does give you a nice overview of who has actually been engaging. So if you want to create an achievement, it's quite simple. You can do it on course completion, which just ties it to the end of your course, or a milestone, which were the ones I was using, which were kind of random points through the course based on triggers that you decide. You can play with both of them through custom, which is the one I tend to go in. So to do that, use, let's call it test, and you upload any information. So this will be visible to the students. You have to give it a location within your course, so that's where I created this folder. And then this would be all of the details that you'd give to the students to say, to achieve this, you need to post on this particular forum, and so on. And then you go to define triggers, which are they're not bad, but they're not good. But you can add multiple rules to it. So under rule 1, this might be the one that's triggered by date. So you can say, after the 29th of April, this achievement will be triggered for everyone. You might also say that you want to give it to everyone who's in group 4. This is the one that will probably be most useful to a lot of people, but not necessarily me for my course, and this is triggered by specific grades. So based on any assignment you've got tied to this particular course, so if this is assignment 3.1, their online CV, you can say whether they have at least one attempt, whether they've scored less than or equal to, more than or equal to, percent between, and all sorts of different things like that. Or you've got review status, which was the one I was using because none of those were really suitable for my purposes. So that's when I'd go through, browse for any item you want in your course and say, activate this achievement based on review of this item. So say that one. And then it gives it that little button at the bottom for students to click to say, reviewed, I've read this, and that triggers their achievement. Then you go on to select reward, and that's where those pictures come in. So you say who the issuer is, when it expires if you want, and you can select whether it's a certificate or whether it's any of these badges. So it might be the happy little face that you might want. for yours, maybe a racing flag, I don't know. So that's up to you. And as I said, you can attach any different ones and say whether to go to Mozilla, the Mozilla backpack or not, which is, as I said, something that isn't necessarily incredibly useful at the moment, but I'm sure will be in the future. And then you save, and that's an achievement added to the student's catalogue for them to try and get. Yeah. So they're quite fun, and I want to play with them more because I'm sure they've got a lot more potential than I've found so far in my relatively rushed first try over this academic year. But I think there's a lot of potential in there to make students, as I said, explore bits of the course they'd otherwise skip, which can be quite frustrating because often that's the most relevant things for them to learn.
Thank you, Gareth.